you so much for having us here. First of all, test the sound levels. Does this work okay?
Great.
From where I am right now? Okay, cool. So, anybody who's ever been at a function like this knows that quite often authors are either shy or they will talk at great length on subjects that have no necessary interest to the audience. So the more you guys make it specific, what it is that you would like to hear from us, what you'd like to have us discuss, what aspect of our work or the work or science fiction or whatever it is that brings it here, the more useful this will be to you. And when the final analysis, it's really about you guys. We would love for you to leave here feeling that the event here at the library served your purposes and made your lives a little bit more what you want them to be. So very, very shortly, we will be asking for questions. That way, that will guide the discussion, because quite frankly, I could talk for 8 hours on nothing, and I don't want that. We have a limited amount of time. It would be best for this to really, really serve you guys here. So with having made that opening statement, my good lady wife.
Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for coming. This is a special facility for us because we were here when Clark Atlanta University planned that great Black Speculative Fiction Conference back in 1997, which is where I first met Steve. And there's a whole long story behind that. But let's just say that we knew immediately that weekend that we wanted to build a life together. And we were amazed that there was an organized enough community of Black speculative fiction lovers back in 1997 even. It's still unusual today, so is that much more unusual in 1997? So we're grateful that your community, you all have been so supportive. I do want to mention at the outset, putting on my Spelman College hat for a moment, I am the Cosby Chair for this year, this academic year. Very excited. My first event was to bring Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker whose independent film, Middle of Nowhere, is helping to sort of rewrite the map for filmmakers, distributors, writers, all of us who are trying to find ways in and around the system. I brought Ava and her lead actress, Himayatsi Kurnialbi. Now, why couldn't I just say it like that? But, I stumbled over her name before. But, and my culminating event next March, put it on your calendars now, March 22nd, will be what I'm calling Black to the Future, the Octavia E. Butler celebration of the Black fantastic imagination, which is we're trying to recreate that beautiful energy behind that conference that brought us together. Also introducing readers to some newer writers in the field, not that new, but Nydia Korfor and Nala Hopkinson, and I don't know how many others. If I could, I would bring in 20 or 30 writers. I'll only have a small budget. I know those are two. And then working on the list, which could be quite impressive, and of course including my good husband, Stephen Barnes, and I'll be there as well. So this has been quite a journey from that airport where we said we could build an empire. I think we both imagined, I don't know, some more dollar signs attached to that empire when we first met. But we have, and I'm very proud of the fact that we have continued to build upon a legacy. Steve was in the field long before I came into the field. I was very fortunate to be published when I was published, not just given the community here in Atlanta and y'all who like speculative fiction, but frankly a whole bunch of other readers who to this day have to fight their book clubs to introduce my books. But still continue to do so and have continued to do so since the very beginning. And very grateful for those readers. So to be here today, all these years later, with Steve and a new baby, which is how all of the books feel, is, oh, and I spent all that time finding my page and lost it again. But in any case, I don't know, would you like us to read a little bit and then talk about the book? I have found the page. Just 1 second. Why, yeah, Philip.
I don't. I guess that books always feel like new babies. They used to. And now at this point in my life, I guess this is like number 28. They don't feel like things anymore. They feel like illusions.
Really?
The process, the stream of stuff that is written, the input, the output, the creative things go on, all the different stages in the creation, that's all real. But when books arrive in boxes and so forth, there's a part of me that feels like, who wrote that? I don't know, because I've already moved. By that time, I've already moved on to doing something else. So they no longer really it no longer really hits me that they exist as concrete objects per se. That's kind of
He
interesting.
doesn't read. I don't know how he doesn't read his books when they come out. I am so bad. I mean, I won't read it, don't get me wrong, because as a writer, you have every sentence memorized, and all you notice is those extra words. It's like, oh, I thought I got that. Copy editing. But I can listen to an audiobook over and over again, because you're adding the element of the actor/narrator, which, you know, for some of us is the closest we've gotten to a dramatization of one of our stories, except for those Tennyson Hardwick shorts we wrote. I got on IMDb doing the shorts that Blair shot, his trailer for the Tennyson Hardwick series. But aside from that, you know, Steve has written for television. We've both written screenplays, but I have yet to have anything produced outside of the Tennyson Hardwick trailer. So audiobooks to me are the next best thing to the movie version. Anyway, this is an excerpt from Devil's Wake. For those of you who haven't read it, don't know much about it, the series has a long history, but in a nutshell, it takes place in a world, basically when civilization has fallen apart because of an outbreak that manifests very much like what we would call zombies in our world, but in the world of this infection, they do not have that name. It's, you know, they're infected, they're biting you. All you need to know is keep away from them. And society has broken down. So our young protagonist, Kendra, who's a very immature 16, but growing up fast, has been under the protection of her grandfather. They only wanted to go to a fortified convenience store. He had a dream of getting her a Coke and put a smile on her face. Instead, they've shown up and it looks like something might have gone wrong at his friend's convenience store. Closer, Joe said, and Kendra pulled up behind him, his shadow. When Joe pushed the glass door open, the salmon-shaped door chimes janged merrily, like old times. Mike had vanished quick because he wasn't behind the counter. A small television set on the counter erupted with ancient canned laughter from people who were either dead or no longer laughing. "Duh!" Homer Simpson's voice crowed. Mike was playing his DVD. "Mike, where'd you go?" Joe's finger massaged his shotgun trigger as he peered behind the counter. Suddenly there was a guffaw from the rear of the store, matching a new fit of laughter from the TV. He'd know that laugh blindfolded. Mike was behind a broom, one of those school custodian brooms with a wide brush sweeping up and back, and large shards of glass clinked as he swept. Mike was laughing so hard his face and crown had turned pink. Joe saw what he was sweeping. The glass had been broken out of one of the refrigerated cases in back, which were now dark and empty. The others were still intact, plastered with Budweiser and Red Bull stickers, but the last door had broken clean off except for a few jagged pieces still standing upright like a mountain range close to the floor. "Y'all had some trouble?" Joe asked. "Nope," Mike said, still laughing. He sounded congested, but otherwise all right. Mike kept it cold 6 months out of the year. "Who broke your glass?" "The boys are fine." Suddenly Mike laughed loudly again. "That Homer," he said, and shook his head. Kendra, too, was staring at the television set, mesmerized. From the look on her face, she could be witnessing the parting of the Red Sea. The kid must miss TV, all right. "Got any Cokes, Mike?" Joe said. Mike could hardly swallow back his laughter long enough to answer. He squatted down, sweeping the glass onto an orange dustpan. "We've got hot dogs there." Suddenly, Mike's face changed. He dropped his broom and it clattered to the floor as he cradled one of his hands close to his chest. "Ow! Careful there, old-timer," Joe said. "Cut yourself?" "Ow, ow, 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 ow." Sounded like it might be bad. Joe realized. He hoped this fool hadn't messed around and cut himself somewhere he shouldn't have. Mike sank from a squat to a sitting position, still cradling his hand. Joe couldn't see any blood yet, but he hurried toward him. "Well, don't sit there whining over it." "Ow, ow, 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 ow." As Joe began to kneel down, Mike's shoulder heaved upward into Joe's midsection, driving the breath from him in a woof and lifting him to his toes. For a moment, Joe was too startled to react. That what the hell reaction, stronger than reflex, that had nearly cost him his life more than once. He was frozen by the sheer surprise of it, the impossibility that he'd been talking to Mike 1 second, and Joe snatched clumsily at the Glock in his belt and fired at Mike's throat. Missed. The second shot hit Mike in the shoulder, but not before Joe had lost what was left of his balance and crashed backward into the broken refrigerator door. 3 things happened at once. His arm snapped against the case doorway as he fell backward, knocking the gun out of his hand before he could feel it fall. A knife of broken glass carved him from below as he fell, slicing into the back of his thigh with such a sudden wave of pain that he screamed. And Mike hiked up Joe's pant leg and took hold of his calf in his teeth, gnawing at him like a dog with a beef rib. Cursing, Joe kicked away at Mike's head with the only leg that was still responding to his body's command. Still, Mike hung on. Somehow, even inside the fog of pain from his injury, Joe felt a chunk of his calf tearing, more hot pain. He was bit, that was certain. He was bit. Every alarm in his head and heart rang. Dear, sweet God, he was bit. That's one moment from Devil's Lake.
So, before we continue with the afternoon symposium, are there any comments, questions, or requests from the audience?
I would like to make a comment. I'm really new to the science fiction world. I'm a brand new author.
Good for you. What's your name?
My name is Elizabeth McCraw, and brought my book.
Oh, great.
But I'm very, very new to everything. Clark Atlanta University graduate. I'm in awe of what you do. I think what you have done is incredible, really incredible. And for me, sitting here listening to you, that inspires me to do more and push harder.
Well, may I make a suggestion?
Sure.
You would like to make a career like this, or at the very least, be more successful than you feel that you currently are. Whenever you want to get better at something, and you're dealing with people who feel to you as if they're on the other side of that issue, whatever, you should look for three things about them. You should look for what their behaviors are, what their emotions are about it, and how they organize things mentally. The belief systems, mental syntax, use of physiology, your body, mind, spirit. So you should cluster your questions about those three things, because when you talk to more than 3 or 4 different people who are all better than you in something, and you notice that they have some consistent behaviors that are different, or some consistent beliefs that are different, or some consistent actions that are different, pay attention to that. So what I would suggest that you do is to guide your questions toward us about, well, how do we do this, or how do we think about this, or how do we feel about this, because that's where you'll get what it is that you're really looking for. Because what you're really looking for is, what was their recipe? How did they do this?
Right.
Because it feels like you're in awe only because you haven't broken down the difference between what it is that we did and what some other people might do. You break that down into small enough pieces, and they're bite-sized for anybody. There's no magic going on here. They're just different behaviors, different feelings, different actions. That's it. Okay, you do those things, and you will start closing the gap between where you are and any other kind of performance that you want.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
Follow-up question.
How did you first get published?
Well, my story, I feel like I'm almost cheating, because when The Between was sold, I guess, in 1994, it was right around the time of Waiting to Exhale. And that might not sound like, what does that have to do with the supernatural thriller? Well, it had everything to do with the supernatural thriller, because that was that time when publishing really opened up its eyes and said, wait a minute, we can make money selling Black commercial fiction. So anything that was commercial in nature, seemed like it was a page turner. They were throwing everything up against the wall to see what would stick. And some authors did stick out of that period. A lot of authors stuck. And then, we've all been through waves ever since then. But I just really feel that if I had come a little bit sooner, I would have had a much tougher time publishing my first novel, which was called Between. It was a little horror novel, sort of like Final Destination, You Cheat Death, and Death Tries to Get You. I probably would have ended up in a horror house where I would have confronted the question of, do the characters have to be Black? Or at least I'm sure I would have sensed a feeling that I could sell it more quickly if the characters weren't Black. But I was able to bypass that whole thing because Terry McMillan in that whole rush to find the next one,
I always suggest that people start with short stories rather than novels for a multitude of different reasons. Someone might or might not take that advice, but I've never heard a reason to convince me that the piece of advice in general was wrong. And when I was unpublished, I decided that I was going to write, complete, polish, and submit 100 different short stories and just collect the rejection slips from them before I even began to seriously consider the question, can I make it? And because of that, then even though it hurt to have rejection slips come back, by the time I got to story, I think it was 23, I was selling regularly, and it was a non-issue. But if you don't do that, if you think, oh, if I get a story rejected, that means I can't do this, or it's my 5th story that's been rejected, oh my God, if you do something like that to yourself, you're crushing your chances of success. So it was make the initial approach with small enough chunks of work that you don't have a gigantic amount of ego and time tied up in it. Write a story a week or a story every other week and send those things in for publication. Within a couple of years, you'll be publishing. You will have also developed the kind of understanding of the way the publishing industry works and the way editors are and so forth and so on, that you start having a sense of how this is as a business rather than the land of Oz. It's like, what is behind the curtain? I have no idea. No, it's just the people over there, and they're trying to find stuff that they can sell so that they can prove to their boss that they make money. What is it that you need to be doing there? You have to take the mystery out of this stuff, okay? There is mystery in what the creative process is and the flow state and how you create ideas and how you get ahead of the curve to find out. There are mysteries that you can't crunch, but a lot of this stuff is just information. It's just, okay, there's just a bunch of different facts that you don't know or blanks that you haven't filled in yet. So that would be my thing. I just gave myself a small chunk, short story, 100 stories, started working. Yes, sir.
And so you did a lot of collaborative work with Niven and Cornell, who were well established at that point. How did you make the connection with Larry Niven? Why is it that science fiction is such a collaborative? You don't see novels in mainstream fiction where 3 people work on them that I'm aware of.
Science fiction, I see some of that mysteries, but I think science fiction is more, we have conventions, and these people get together at conventions and get drunk together and have fun and so forth and hang out. Why that is, I don't have a theory for that, more than mysteries. I know that there are mystery conventions too and other things too. Are there really more? I couldn't even tell you that, probably. Okay. There probably are.
Yeah.
But in terms of how I met Larry, there was a point relatively early in my career. I'd sold a few stories, but I wasn't doing what it was I wanted to do or what I felt my capacity was. And so, as I mentioned this young lady right here, my basic idea is if I want to get better at something, I find somebody who's better than me at that thing and model them. Just straight neurolinguistic programming, okay? And so I wanted to find a working writer. And I asked a friend of mine, a guy named Otis, who I went to college with, and I said, where can I find science fiction writers? Where do they meet the public, in Los Angeles? And he said, well, Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle hang out at the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society in Burbank. And so it was a science fiction club every Thursday. They had a club in Larry Niven. So I said to myself, Larry Niven. I've heard that name. And where have I heard that name? And so I went to my library and I found a collection of his stories called All the Myriad Ways, in which there was a brilliant story called All the Myriad Ways. And I read it so that I then felt that I could honestly compliment him, because I have this theory that people basically behave as if they can read your mind. That you really can't bullshit people beyond a certain point. So I needed to be able to have an honest way to approach him. So I went to the Las Vegas that night, and I waited until he arrived, and I walked up to him and I said, hello, Mr. Niven, my name is Stephen Barnes, and I'm a writer. And he looked at me and said, okay, tell me a story. And because I found out that from the way I had approached him, that was, I was being an asshole. now, fortunately, I had put a story in the mail earlier that day about a compulsive gambler who hawks his pacemaker, and so I fumbled out the outline of my story, and he said, "Oh, okay," and that began the conversation. There's more to it, but that was the base. That was most of it. And the rest of it was salesmanship and seduction. It was just like, how do I get him interested in me? How do I catch his attention? How do I do this? But it is, chance favors the prepared mind. If I had not done my work before I ever came to him, I wouldn't have had a prayer.
And a lot of writers would have frozen up at the Tell Me a Story.
Oh, yeah.
A lot, yeah.
And follow-up question.
Sure, sorry.
I mentioned in the introduction To See the Invisible Man, where, you know, it's a new Twilight Zone episode about a guy where criminals are, what's the word?
They're shunned,
Judged.
basically. For the crime of emotional coldness, a man is sentenced to a year of invisibility during which no one could acknowledge his existence.
And what you did there that I thought was brilliant was the whole, so in the story, this is not in the story, but they give them this sort of shanker-like thing on their foreheads, this
Yeah.
mark that's not in the story, that was like the perfect emblem for television or for any visual medium. I want to know how you came up with that, because that was just that. I love that story, but that.
First of all, I couldn't tell you that I came up with it. I don't remember the original. The original story was written by Robert Silverberg from a throwaway line in a story by Jorge Luis Borges about how he had been sentenced to a year of invisibility. And so Silverberg wrote a story from that. Phil DeGuerre, James Crocker, and I forget the other guy's name, were producing the new Twilight Zone. I shared an agent with Phil DeGuerre. You know, so it's all social connections in Hollywood. So I shared an agent with Phil DeGuerre, so I had a chance to get in there. And one of the questions they asked, one of the questions they asked was, what classic science fiction stories do you think would be appropriate for the Twilight Zone? I remember To See the Invisible Man, and I pitched it to them. They liked it. We went like that. But the question of the brand on the forehead that's placed, you know, for a year, I honestly couldn't tell you whether that's in the original story or not.
I can tell you it is not.
It is not?
It is
Then it was
absolutely
just a
not.
matter of, okay, we need visual things so that there is a difference between who this person is and who other people are. Television and film especially are hugely visual media. In general, if you can't turn off the sound and understand what's going on, it ain't a movie. And television is halfway between there because they want you to be able to hear what's going on, even if you're in the other room getting some chips and dip. It's very much like that. So you ask yourself, what is the succession of visual symbols that will enable me to create the emotional change in the audience that will give them the story arc? Okay, so everything that happens in the story is there, I would assume, because there's a theory that any piece of information that you have in your head that does not make your life, does not reduce the amount of pain in your life, is a useless piece of information. In other words, it has to have some emotional impact, one way or the other. In a story, if you're transferring a story from the page to the stage, or from the page to cinema, then you have to ask yourself, what is the succession of visual images that will carry the emotional wave of the story? So a lot of times, both because a movie is only about 120 pages of a book, you have to cut a huge amount out of that book. You have to reinvent, reinterpret, put things together, blend them, mix them. So people are always asking, well, why was the movie different from the book? Because movies aren't books and stage plays aren't short stories, and television episodes aren't short stories. So it was a matter of what is the emotion that I want people to have at the end. What series of images can I cascade to plausibly create such an emotional change in my audience by the end? Okay, go backwards from there. Try to ask myself what the writer was thinking, what the writer was feeling, what the writer intended. Cleave unto that as much as possible, but the most important thing is it good? If you are faithful to the original writer, but it's crap, you haven't done anything. On the other hand, if you change it and the writer's furious with you, but people love it and have made the kind of positive changes or see the kinds of things that the writer intended, then the writer is wrong. The original story still exists. You haven't done anything to that original story. Movies, television episodes, whatnot, have to exist on their own, or they don't exist at all.
I have a question about some of the stories that you all have written but got rejected. Now, have you all...
What are you trying to say, huh? Huh? Let me step outside and talk about this.
Follow-up question.
Well played, sir.
Now, have you ever gone back to those and rewritten them or resubmitted them and gotten them accepted?
Well, do I wish the answer to that were yes. That would be such a helpful thing to do. It's as
Under a
if,
new name.
you know, I kind of sort of did one time. Okay, I do have one success story. And the reason I didn't publish short stories first was not for lack of trying. I really couldn't. I mean, I sold one called Amusement. It was, the plot doesn't really matter. It's a little dark. I was imitating an English writer named Ian McEwan, and while it sounded nothing like Ian McEwan, it did help me clarify my own voice in some interesting ways. So I always suggest that as an exercise to writers, you know. Don't avoid writers that you admire or you think are too similar to you. Actually see if you could write a story in that writer's voice, what comes out. But the magazine went out of business before it could publish a story. So it was accepted, but then ultimately, I guess, rejected. The ultimate rejection is it was not published. And it sat in a drawer for years and years, as have many other stories that were just outright rejected, that have sat in my drawer for years and years. And I was invited to submit it to a collection, an anthology. So I was able to resurrect it. But no, in terms of, there's an aspect of my writing life, especially in the early 20s, right before I published Between, those stories I was working on just before I broke through to being a consistently professional level writer, where I still have felt stuck, even in years later, when I think back, okay, now you've got the skills, go back, make it happen. And it just, there's always something more interesting to do. So I don't know.
I can't think of a specific story. I've never had a novel rejected. I had a couple that didn't get published because the publishers got freaked out when they thought they'd received a death threat over the material.
Right.
True story. it was based on the video game Assassin's Creed. Okay, and I was hired to write 3 books based on the video game Assassin's Creed, which is dealing with the Hashashin, the Islamic ninjas, basically, and who really terrorized the Crusaders, you know, during those days. And so I thought this was going to be a trip. So I had a whole lot of fun. I have a friend who's a Sufi, and I was doing my research. I got this all together. I mean, I'd written 2 books set in a world in which Islamic Africans had colonized America, so I felt perfectly comfortable dealing with that culture. I was having a good time with it. And then I wrote the first book. It got approved. And then my editor called me up, and he said, we got a problem. He said, what was this? It was like not that long after 9/11. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, the video game company, Ubisoft, I think was the name of the company. Yeah, that's what it was.
Big one.
They had a visit from several well-dressed gentlemen. See, the lineage of the original assassins still exists to this day. And the leader is a gentleman named the Aga Khan, whose followers are in India at this point, I believe. And these gentlemen were representatives of this lineage, and they did not appreciate their history being appropriated for fantasy. And while they didn't seem to object to the video game that much, or at least the company did not feel that they were willing to be moved on that, they felt very uncomfortable about a novelization, and I think that they had visions of their cars blowing up in the parking lot. So they canceled the book. They still paid me for the first one. Yeah, and I turned around and resold that book to a convention that wanted to know that I had like a Trump novel or something like this that they could publish, and they had me as guest of honor. So I got paid for something that kind of got rejected, kind of situation. But I just thought to myself, you wussies. You know?
But
Ubisoft.
I think part of the spirit of your
Yeah, Ubisoft, that's right.
Like, I'm trying to write a short story now. I say trying because it's been a struggle. And part of that struggle is I had some recent loss. I lost my mother in February, and it's difficult to start writing when you're not on deadline. What the job at Spelman affords me is time to work on projects I want to work on, sort of regardless of a deadline or a check, and that's a good feeling. I mean, I couldn't wait to quit my job in newspapers and become a full-time writer, but now I'm sort of seeing the other side that, hey, sometimes it's nice to have a full-time job and just write what you want, right? So I've totally seen that now. But in the case of underdeveloped short stories, it's very difficult to know when you just need to keep pushing at it and pushing at it and pushing at it and have that right reader, I think. Yeah, I'm sending 3 students from Spelman to a workshop called Bona, which is Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, to have intensive workshop study, because I think aside from good reading, the most essential part of a writer's growth is in that feedback loop. You have to have readers who will push you. You have to, Steve talks about crying, well, Larry and Jerry remembers first drafts. You need those readers, and that's why I do encourage writers to submit and subject themselves to rejection. Because even though we hate it, if you find the right person, the right voice, sometimes it's a friend, rarely a family member. If you're lucky enough to find a family member who can also be a critical reader, that's great. But often you have to go outside a spouse, brother, sister, parent. Find writers, hopefully better writers than you are, you know, who can call you on your stuff and keep at it. Yes?
If you're self-published, can you resubmit to publishing companies?
Depends on the company. If you self-publish and been very successful, they'll come to you and say, listen, can we publish your book? So I mean, there are self-published writers who have used that to, you know, to catch the attention of publishing companies.
No,
absolutely.
Honestly, I'm self-published, but I'm not very successful yet.
Yeah.
Right, but also I think, do you have a question? Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you'll be next. I think in a lot of cases, sometimes that might work to your advantage. You know, if they feel like enough people will go back and buy it, or getting an agent's attention can be just as hard as getting a publisher's attention. And an agent can help guide you in the sense that, you know, I really love your book. I would have an easier time selling it if.
It's one of the reasons I just suggest that people start with short story. You don't need an agent.
Yeah, yeah. But absolutely, I know that that is a dream of a lot of writers in self-publishing. There are advantages and disadvantages to being your own boss, into that word self, which is a very, very big word. And while all writers do have to have a degree of business savvy to succeed, I truly believe that, there's a line you cross at a certain point where you feel like you're more entrepreneur author than you are a writer, you know what I mean? And it takes up so much of your time, and it can, if you let it.
Do you want to be a writer or do you want to be a publisher?
Eat you.
A writer.
Right,
Yeah, so it'd be, you know, get your day job down tight and write short stories until you start publishing.
and here's the thing I love about short stories and why I'm returning to them. And I'm lucky enough now that from time to time I hear from someone who says, oh yeah, I just started Nightmare Magazine. Can we publish this whatever story that Brandon Massey published years ago or came out here? I don't write that many, but they get republished, and that brings new readers. You can use a published short story to get an agent, potentially, or to at least start a conversation with an agent. You can gain notice, you can gain awards.
Well, it's the start of the conversation thing. Part of the advantage or part of the positive thing about writing short stories is what you really want is to get into a dialogue with people who understand the business. And the editors, the people reading your stuff, they understand the business. So every time you write a story for one of them, you are trying to advance the conversation. At first, you will just get rejection slips. At some point, you will catch their interest, and they will begin to give you suggestions. If you're doing your work, and the basic thing is, you know, you read 10 times as much as you write, and read one level up from where you want to write. Okay, because you assume, you know, that it gets processed down level. And if you will do that and you put your energy behind that, then you will be feeding what I call sort of the machine. And you will eventually, if you're paying attention, you'll begin to approach your potential. You know, what it is that you can bring to the field and who it is that you are. I do think that most people who have an average capacity for language, or if you're willing to be scathingly honest about your emotions and you're willing to study and do your work, most people can get published. Whether or not you can make a living at it is a separate question.
And sometimes I wonder even how valid is that question, you know, really. I mean, what artists through history have been able to do that? Why do we expect that we will? Although we can all point to examples of people who have, so that makes it so tempting, but it's a double-edged sword. You had a question in the back.
Yes, I do. Hi, my name is Marilyn Neal, and I'm not an author, but I work with a number of authors. So my company's called
Doing what?
Books. I'm sorry?
What do you do with these authors?
I help promote them, give them.
Oh, your promotion.
All right.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
I promote them, give them opportunities to present their work. And we're recently launching a TV show for authors.
Oh.
So that's going to be very
Nice.
cool. So one of the things I'm hearing from you, and everyone asks, is the big elephant in the room question. how do I get paid? And you've addressed a lot of that. But do you require them to, the new thing is using all the social media for your marketing piece. In today's world, would you recommend that they use that forum more so than reaching out to various conferences and going there and being speakers? What do you think is the best vehicle?
Well,
Go ahead.
Oh, great.
I'll give you an example. I don't know how many of you know the name Kwantu Amaru. I don't know how he wrote a book called One Blood. I think he sold about 5,000 copies, independently published, black horror. He did not go to a single book signing to sell those books. So that does speak to the power of social media, and I do think absolutely any new author needs to have an internet presence. If you put your name into Google, stuff should come up. Your Facebook page should come up. A Twitter stream should come up. Your Goodreads page, etc. Amazon page. I mean, just some very basic things. But you can also lose yourself in that hamster wheel. That can be like a full-time job. And if it isn't, you don't have time to treat it like it is. And it's very tempting to either spend all your money traveling or spend all your time on social media. So I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think the most successful writers today learn to combine those elements. You don't rely on Facebook to sell your books. Direct sales is tacky on Facebook, okay? It really is. And your readers and friends respond to it that way. The whole point is we're getting to know each other. Aren't we all friends here? It's like, oh, I'm so excited, my book is coming out, so they're sharing your joy, and a thimble full of them will actually buy that book. and a lot of them will just like it and not buy the book, I really thought I had something going until my publisher had a page where you could literally see how many sales you had. So all those people who like the page, y'all did not buy the book. I'm sorry, the letters still lie. So it's a limited tool. I think it's an essential tool that even established authors who don't want to do it and don't see the point of it are sort of grudgingly being pushed toward it for a reason, because you can spread the word to new corners, younger readers, non-traditional avenues to finding readers. But those traditional avenues are also important for the networking piece that Steve was talking about, who you meet, trading advice. You can do that over social networking, but there's nothing that replaces the face-to-face completely.
Yeah, and she touched on something just in terms of trading advice. When possible, don't trade advice with people who are at your level and below. Absolutely. What you look for is, how do I get access to people who are above my level? You want to get better at tennis, play with people who are better at you. It's real simple. The people who are at your level and below will try to convince you that their way works. And that means that if they have not been successful, they will try to convince you that nobody can be. It's very, very important. You can kill your dreams like that. This young lady right here.
I have wondered about this for so long, and I'm so glad to ask both of you this question. Your collaboration with Blair Underwood seems like such a departure from the genre that both of you write in. How did it come about?
Shall I begin?
Good question.
Well, some of you might know from way back that Blair Underwood optioned my soul to keep for years. Really sort of single-handedly kept the project alive in Hollywood for many years. Halle Berry was in talks to play Jessica. Angela Bassett was interested in playing Jessica. It was at a studio for years and years. Over time, as we got hung up, and then Steve and I adapted The Good House, my novel. That's my first film sale. So I'm in the WGA to this day because of that. So we had a great experience on the one hand, but like many projects, they didn't ever get made. So then you're left with the relationships and the lessons, and Hollywood is full of relationships and lessons. So part of that relationship with Blair grew into the Tennyson Hardwood series. Blair wanted to do a collaboration, and then Steve said, if you're going to do that, do a series. Why not mystery? We'd always been interested in mystery. Suspense, even though it's a little bit of a departure, we both write suspenseful work. Whether it's science fiction or horror, there's always an element of suspense in what we write, wouldn't you say?
I would think there's an element of suspense in any writing.
Well,
if
yeah.
you're not in suspense about it, why are you writing it?
Right.
You're reading
push
because you
that.
want to know what happens next.
We like to push that button. I do with the readers, and I know you do. So that's how it came about, and also to address the dearth of even something so simple as a recurring detective character in film who happens to be black. I mean, we don't have to talk about Alex Cross, okay? We can have a whole conversation about that, but I'll tell you what is sad to me is how many movies will not get greenlit. Walter Mosley's gonna have blowback because of this, you know, because when a project fails,
The TV show, NBC had optioned.
it fell
Easy
apart.
Rolls,
It fell apart.
But there's never been a black dramatic show with a black lead as central. There have been a few with ensembles.
Hawk.
Hawk was not successful.
No,
It lasted one
okay.
season.
Not
And they tried it. The audience,
I missed
yeah,
it.
the audience won't accept it. The audience will not. The ratings will not turn up. Now you can either, as far as I'm concerned, you can prove it statistically that they won't. So you can argue about why it happens, but you can't argue that it doesn't happen. So the same thing is true in film. That there aren't black men can't have love scenes in movies and have that movie get a large audience.
Wow.
It just does not happen. So either you can look directly at that truth and kind of figure out, okay, how am I going to play my game despite this truth, or you can ignore it and stumble right into a minefield. So my whole career has been about, well, what's actually going on as opposed to what I wish was going on, as opposed to what people say is going on. Because what I have to do is construct my career based upon what's really happening rather than my hallucinations or my fantasies or even the politically correct things that people say. So in trying to determine this, then I can do something that relates to the situation as it is. If you understand gravity, you can build a spaceship. But if you ignore gravity, you'll think you can flap your wings and fly. So what happened with the bean counters in Hollywood is that they looked at the numbers that Tyler Perry got and said, we can move this audience over here. And Tyler Perry said to them, yes, my audience will come with me. And they believed it. They did not have the emotional intelligence to grasp that because Tyler Perry is successful wearing a dress does not mean he will be successful playing a macho man. They did not ask themselves that question. So they were not capable of putting themselves emotionally in the position of the audience. When they cast George Lazenby, when they got rid of Sean Connery, or Sean Connery left the James Bond series and George Lazenby was the next guy, they sent a hooker to his room to be sure he wasn't gay. They understood just that well the public perception, energetics, and they did not want to whiff of anything other than who is this macho guy, James Bond. The fact that these producers would think that you could take this guy who, basically Alex Crossdresser is what they created. And I've seen Queen Latifah direct project more male energy in a movie than Tyler Perry did. So my feeling is that there are a lot of potholes. There's a lot of minefield out there, and a lot of things that people cannot talk about publicly without being politically correct. I simply don't give a damn.
I do, just because I find James Patterson's writing appalling.
Didn't used to be. He used to be better.
He might be. I don't know what he's doing now. But the issue is, and this is something, and this is why I think black novelists are treated so well by actors in Hollywood, because they're hungry for roles that are deeper than the scripts that they see. They scratch their heads with puzzlement, just as we do, at some of the casting decisions that are made purely on a financial basis. One example would be the Alex Cross decision. The other one would be, and I have no problems with this actress, but the Nina Simone picture is not a match for me for this actress. It's just, and I think as viewers, we all look back and see that. But there are calculations going on financially that seem to make sense from where other people are standing. And black actors are kind of caught in the middle of that. The celebrity culture, your name recognition, that's why there's a rapper in this role instead of an actor. So even though everybody else in this movie is a very fine actor, and the black character is not a fine actor, that doesn't matter to anybody because he's got name recognition and will bring people.
Well, then one has to ask the question, well, yeah, you can find explanations for why this is happening, okay? But the errors are always fall in one direction. And anytime you have a bunch of supposedly random events like we're making financial decisions, which should be content neutral in terms of the kinds of results you get from that.
Right.
But they always go in one direction. Yeah, there's always going to be kind of emasculated, and he's going to be the only one in the group that cannot act. And so forth. And you see that pattern enough times, and you begin to think that there is something unconsciously where they're looking for a reason, a plausible reason to do what they wanted to do anyway. I've seen that trait in human psychology pop up often enough, and I remember a line from the James Bond book Goldfinger. I love this line. It says, "My friends in Chicago have a saying, Mr. Bond. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, the third time it's enemy action." So I look at Blade, and I look at Shaft, and I look at Alex Cross, and I think, neutered all three.
Wow.
Now, do you know the anecdote from the set of Shaft when Gordon Parks was directing it?
The
No,
original
what are you talking
movie?
about?
Yeah, I'm talking about
The remake.
the remake, of course.
Got it. Yeah.
But what anecdote are we talking about?
Gordon Parks was walking on the set of Shaft and saw Richard Roundtree going in the other direction with a can of shaving cream and a razor. He said, "Richard, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, the producer just told me to shave my mustache off." And so Gordon Parks went and kicked the producer a new orifice.
Right.
And said, "Yeah, I know what you're trying to do, and it's not going to happen."
Oh.
He is going to be a mustachio leading black man on the screen. So they actually tried to, in some subtle way, emasculate
just
the
a little
original
bit.
Shaft.
Yeah. But at that period of time, the original Shaft only cost $750,000.
Right.
So they knew that they were aiming at a niche market and made a lot of money. But, and then there was, between 1968 and about 1973 is the only period in American cinematic history where black people were treated very much just like human beings. After that, everybody began to try to go for the long ball. And it's like, well, we would like the huge market thing. So, and at that point, you have to ask yourself the question, well, what are white people going to think about this imagery?
And it gets broader and broader and broader and less representative of the real people we know.
Right.
It's just, and it's frustrating. I kind of caught the Hollywood bug. We were out there for 6 years, and we'll be back, and I'm using this time at Spelman to work on my own screenwriting. Since I'm teaching screenwriting, it's just some of the most fun I've had teaching, period, is a screenwriting class. And I'm using that time to write my own version of My Soul to Keep, which I never actually did, and all the different conversations and years it was in development. There were 2 or 3 other screenwriters working on it. I never had a chance. So now I want to just do my own version. Do I think there'll be a movie made? No. Do I hope so? Yes. And a hope is all a writer needs to keep going. As long as you have a legitimate hope. And in terms of the Tennyson Harvard series, and I'm sorry, just to bring it back around to that, it was trying to sort of do an end run against all the blockages toward what should be a very simple thing, which is a black detective and a
Or just
story.
or
anybody.
a black man who is smart and sexy and survives the story. I mean, the fact is that there is not, you cannot point to a single week in American cinema where playing at your local Cineplex are not stories of white guys who are smart and sexy, get laid and survive the movie. Not a single week. I will choose weeks at random and just take a look. Let me take a look at the top 20 movies. No, there's always one there. In other words, it is a consistent vitamin. It is a consistent nutrient that white people are extraordinarily careful to be certain that they're giving themselves every week, period. And it is that exact same vitamin that is missing on the one hand. Now, one could ask questions about what might occur from a developmental disability, point of view. Is this important? Is it important to have such images? An analysis of world mythology would suggest yes, because we continually find any people who are creating their own images will give themselves these images all the time, 24/7. Why? Once again, you could have probably a really, really interesting symposium on why it is true. But what is true is it is here in this community. It is not present over here. I would say it's an important thing. I consider it sufficiently important to put a lot of thought into it. and to have tried to find some ways to fill that gap in. Is it really important? I don't know, but I'm willing to put down money that it is.
Oh, lots of questions. I guess.
Anyone who has an answer,
Yeah,
has to
I'll
question.
wait.
This
I
lady.
can wait.
She can wait.
I've asked you to wait, but I'll let you go first.
Now I'm thinking,
That's dangerous.
when
Black woman
got
would have
into
thought, boy.
office,
It was
I noticed in some of the commercials, a lot more black men with their children in commercial, like Tide commercial or
Yeah,
a,
recently.
cheer, you know, something, you saw a lot
More
more
dads.
That's nice.
black families.
That's cool.
The situation, but now that we have a generation of kids who actually see a black man in office, what do you think visually now could happen in cinema?
You know
It's
what?
a-
I have a theory about this. And in terms of the commercials, I think that speaks directly to their marketplace research. You see a lot of blacks in technology commercials because we disproportionately buy these products faster than some other communities. I think they can look at data and really target that so that it more reflects what our country looks like. And that's a great example. But I personally think that since President Obama has been in office, we've actually lost some ground in the cinema, for example. It was, first of all, we're not going to see another black president for a long time in the cinema. They're white. Again.
That's not
Yeah.
true. There are a couple
Oh,
in the pipeline right now. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wrong. Thank goodness. That's because they think they're going to vote Obama out. No. But all right, here's what and again, this is all anecdotal. I've seen a lot of trailers, but there was a time I think we had sort of that hard-fought token part. You know, even if it was a rapper, if it was an ensemble cast, like higher than 5 people, one of those would be a person who could be the smart friend. You know, usually it was a comedian in that role or a rapper in that role, and very often now I don't see that role anymore. I see trailers that are completely white now in a way that I find we've lost the police captain, we've lost the judge.
No, what I
Not
think is,
universally, but I feel like there is a little payback there.
I think that generation to generation, things have gotten better for every generation since emancipation. But it's not a straight line, and it doesn't happen fast enough for people who have a local view, you know, short term. It's like, well, why aren't we all the way there? You know, because human beings don't change that rapidly. There's nothing unusual going on here. There's nothing special, nothing especially slow about us or evil about white people. Just human beings are like that. It just sucks to be on the losing end of a particular historical blip in that particular sense. I think that Barack Obama sucked up all the goodwill in the room, boy. I think it was like, you know, it's like, save us, magical Negro. And it turned out he was just a brilliant, hardworking guy.
Yeah.
He wasn't magic. You know, he wasn't going to be
Morgan
Morgan
Freeman.
Freeman and turn the ads right away. It wasn't going to happen. And so what happened is in the fantasy worlds of white people, they can control it. They can make believe that they are the smartest, sexiest, toughest human beings on the planet, just like every group of people believes about themselves. Every mythology of every group of people on the face of the earth says God made us first and loves us best. That's what people do. And you know, there's nothing unusual about this if you take the long view. It just sucks. That's all. You know, I can deal with that. But is there a backlash in cinema? Yeah, there's some. But you know, it will go back because you know because for a lot of different reasons. First of all, the demographics are changing.
True.
Secondly, we're enough generations away from slavery that people can begin to talk about that without feeling guilt and fear. And then we're getting far enough away from Jim Crow that people can you know, have some of that reaction too without feeling guilt and fear. I mean, what's the guilt? What's the fear? I remember lecturing at this one white college and somebody asked the question, well, why are black people so angry? And so I said, well, imagine something. If we had enslaved you and, let's see, murdered and tortured and sold away your children and raped your women, and then we're in denial about the fact we've done that, you think maybe you'd like to hurt us? And suddenly everybody in the room was kind of going, oh, they wanted to hurt me right then. I wrote this book, Lion's Blood, about alternate history, in which Islamic Africans colonized, developed a civilization, a technological civilization before Europe, and conquered Europe and colonized the Americas, bringing white and Irish, Irish and other white slaves here. And I had because I was determined that I was going to treat those white characters with more courtesy, respect, and inwardness than I had ever seen a white writer give to black. I simply was not going to fall into the same pit that I had seen others use. I will not do that. So I had, a Celtic bard writing Irish slave songs for me, and researchers doing other things to make certain, in white readers, at early points in the book, of people who were familiar with Irish history, to make certain I got it right? And I knew that I'd done my job right when one early reader on the book, lady named Sonia, was reading it. She told me that she was walking down the street in Portland, and this black man started walking toward her, and she wanted to run up to him and grab him and say, "Let my people go!" I said, "Oh, yeah, I must be doing it right." There's nothing special going on here. Human beings are kinder to each other than nature is kind to animals in general. I would rather have been black in America than a rabbit in the woods. And it sucks. And it's getting better. And it ain't good yet.
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Given the two particular movie producers, your TD Jakes.
Slave songs.
Okay.
I just love the slave songs. Yeah.
TD Jakes and Think Like a Man. I just got his name.
Oh, right. That came the closest to being what I would call a successful movie that had black characters who were also sexually. They didn't get across the $100 million mark, but it got up to 87.
Okay.
That's better than any movie he's ever done.
Do you think that it will take that element, like a T.D. Jakes or a Steve Harvey, to bring the reality and get quality actors to make it a successful story?
Well,
or can that come from any?
Well, it can come from anywhere. But remember, film is very much a collaborative medium. It takes tens of millions of dollars to get a movie made, sometimes hundreds of millions, depending on the size of the movie. No single person of any kind can do that. Nobody can do that.
For a major studio release, there aren't enough blacks to crew a movie that size.
Okay.
Yeah, you
So
simply
you
couldn't do
have
it.
to go outside your community, and everybody has to be convinced that they're on board.
Anyone, if a movie costs 20, 30, 40 million dollars, no one with the money to bankroll such a movie would be stupid enough to do it. Okay? I mean, because you simply don't make a movie with your own money. There are very, very rare exceptions to that. Most of them have been horrific failures. A couple have been successful. Mel Gibson did fine with Passion of the Christ.
But Sherman Helmsley pretty much bankrupted himself
Yeah.
on and back a movie.
See, that's what happens.
And that's typical. That happens a
You
lot.
create a corporation. You
So-
share the risk of the reward.
I want
Well, you have not had a question.
Oh, go ahead. I used to be the young adult librarian at the Roswell Library, and it was encouraging to see that Devil's Weight, I think the protagonists in the group are young people.
Yes.
Could you just speak to that a little bit? Because it's always really good with that introduction, when people really start to love literature or walk away from it, is at that age to have characters that speak to that.
Thank you for bringing it back to Devil's Weight, which you will have on sale afterward. Would you like to speak to that, Noah?
Yeah, well, when we started writing the book, we realized that the protagonists were between the ages of 16 and 18. And so we simply decided, why not write a book that people aged 16 to 18 could read without their parents being worried about it.
Or 14.
And so we decided to keep the violence, sexuality, sensuality, and so forth at a PG-13 level, that's all. It was just a very, very deliberate thought, and all that meant was that we cut out a little bit of bad language. There's a little bit of sexuality that's kept off stage. The violence is amped down when things do happen. It's bad, but we understand that horror and suspense is more about what you don't want to see than what you saw. Okay? So once you convince people that your characters are genuinely in threat, that we are willing to kill people, then you don't need to have them torn apart. You don't need to do Saw.
No.
Saw is not about being scared. Saw is about look at the nifty special effects. So that's not what we wanted to do. So it was very, very deliberate and partially marketing, but even if Bill Gates gave me a grant for $100 million, I'd be concerned about marketing because I want it to reach an audience. So there's nothing corrupt about specifically asking myself, what do I need to do for this to be able to get through this process? That artists who can't, there's a name for artists who cannot direct their stuff at an audience, and that name generally is unpublished. Okay, you really have to be willing to wear your big boy hat.
And I think the one thing, just the void, kind of like the other genres that you were talking about, just the void of representation of people of color, YA is a place that void is just as big anywhere else. So I really commend
There are
you.
genres that are not as bad. Mystery writing ain't bad. You know, mysteries, there are a lot of iconic black characters. I mean, Coffin Ed Johnson, and Gravedigger Jones, and Shaft, and Virgil Tibbs, and you know, and on and on and on. Why that is, and not in the science fiction fantasy field, once again, all one can do is theorize.
Be the change, though, everybody. Yes.
I wanted to ask you more about the mythological properties as far as history and characters. Because when I started hearing you talk about how, you know, we keep on seeing these reoccurring themes, right? So we kind of make our own mythology. And my son, oddly enough, ran across one of these video games that deal with World War II. He's a big historical buff. And someone had made an addition to the game where there are black soldiers fighting along the white soldiers in the video game, World War II. So now you know that didn't happen.
Well, it didn't happen very much.
Say that again?
You know,
What was in the World War II?
I wanted to know.
And we're integrated units in the video game.
I'm looking for, you know, this opinion about what's going on about the mythology behind.
Okay, can you ask a specific
characters.
question? I'm not sure of the specific question you're asking.
The question really is, how do you feel about authors, regardless of whether or not it's a video game or a story, going back to history and changing that history for that new public? Because I wasn't sure how I felt sitting there as a parent, watching him play. I knew he knew the history. Watching him play that video game and seeing all these black soldiers running around in real brotherhood with these white soldiers on the World War II battlefield.
Well, I guess the question would be, did it ever happen? The answer would be yes. Were units integrated? No. Did non-integrated units end up fighting side by side? Yes. You know, so, you know, then there is the question, well, what if it hadn't ever happened? Would it still be legitimate? Then that gets a little iffier. You know, do you have the right to change history in order to create image systems? Well, everybody else does it. I mean, the fact of it is, if you take a look at images of the Buddha. Buddha was an Indian prince, Gautama Buddha. You take a look at images of him in India, and he looks like an Indian prince. In China, he looks like a fat Chinese guy.
Right.
That's what people do. You know, it's like, I remember the best political cartoon I ever saw in my life, Jules Feiffer, who used to do it in the Times, had an image of a black intellectual sitting across the table from a white intellectual. And the dialogue goes like this. The black guy saying, you have your history, white history, written by white people to promote white power. We want our history, black history, written by black people to promote black power. Our demand is separate but equal lies. I loved that.
Also, to speak to that, which is a really interesting question, because part of me is, as a mom, and I have a son who loves watching video games, and who, because he watches some movies that are a little intended for kids a little older than he is, he started to notice some of the patterns about how black men or characters are treated violently in movies. And yes, you know, there would be a dearth of black characters in his video games. So as you were talking, I was asking myself, well, how would Jason feel to be playing that game with those black soldiers? He'd probably feel pretty good. You know, he might not point it out and say, oh, look, they're black. Although he might at this point. But I think your concern is sort of this myth, of course, that is continually perpetuated, that all of the things that sort of have run through our generational family histories did not happen. Sort of the rewriting and burial of that history, and that is a very serious problem. And you can see the amnesia. I was shocked during the John Kerry campaign at how many people had forgotten what happened just in Vietnam. You know, that they still didn't quite get.
It would seem to me that your question is, if there is a need for mythology, and you're creating mythology, do you have the need to be historically accurate? No, you have the need to be honest. Now, it's not the same thing. Facts are not exactly the same thing as truth. And if your job is to create an emotional through line, and all successful mythologies that I can see help people deal with the questions, but there are only two questions. What is true and who am I? Out of those two questions, which are both really two versions of the same question, what is? What is the world out there, and who are we that observe it? Cosmology and epistemology. To the degree that you are helping people say, well, where am I in the world? What is the purpose of my existence? Where did I come from? Where am I going? You have, from my point of view, the obligation to provide the emotional vitamins that people need to feel like they are balanced in the world, that their life has some meaning, that they have some worth. Okay, and if you take a look at any successful culture, if you take a look at Africans, Europeans, Asians, any people that have had control of themselves, they may be poor, but they've got their mythology, they've got their religion, they've got the sense of, I am connected all the way back to the beginning of the universe, and this is who I am. But to a certain degree, Black Americans are the only human beings on the planet who have a dominating mythology that says that their oppressors are closer to the divine than they are. We're the only ones. I don't know of any other group like that. And if you don't think that that cuts us off from one of the aspects, and I'm a Christian, right? And I can look at that and say, that was the best mind control technique anybody could possibly. I mean, how can you do better than brainwash somebody by having them kneel with their eyes rolled up so they go into alpha looking at an image of a white man who's tortured for your sins? That's great. I wish I'd come up with that. No matter what you do, even if you accept God as the only begotten Son, Christ, the only begotten Son of God, you still have to grasp the fact that this group of people were denied certain core mythologies that every other group makes certain to give their children about who are you, where are you going, where'd you come from, what do you fight for, what is worth fighting for, how do you find love, how do you get sex ethically, how do you do these things? Because if you don't do that, what you will do is when young men hit their testosterone flush and what they want to know is, what do I do with my fear and how do I get laid? They're going to look to anybody who has an answer for them. Oh, get a big gun, sell drugs, just knock up some chick? Because that's what they will do if the other answer is be a eunuch. So you find some way to give people some path. Who am I? Who are you? How do I become a young man, young woman? How do I watch my parents grow old? How do I gather power? How do I satisfy my needs for power and sex ethically? How do I grow old and die with meaning? You look at those things and you write stories that are directed back to the younger you. You ask yourself, what was it that I needed more than roses need rain? And you write that story from whatever wisdom the intervening years have brought you. You do that, and to hell with the rest of it. It's not your job to write for anybody but yourself, primarily. Then out of the stories that you'd like to write yourself, you ask yourself, which of these stories could possibly be acceptable and successful on a larger scale?
It's universal enough to find
It's
a
universal,
wide
but your
variety.
primary responsibility, you must take care of yourself first, because nobody else will.
No, that's true. I know you're standing. as a-
Yeah, I do, we want to make sure that we have time for people to actually purchase the book.
Oh,
And
that's true.
But maybe we could actually, maybe is there another section that we could actually read going into?
Do you want to do that, honey? And while you find the page, I'll speak to that really quickly. Make myself. No, a lot, I think, of what motivates me as a writer, having grown up raised by civil rights activists and being sort of homeschooled on all that history, is a desire to go back and rewrite history through my fiction. That's why Dawid, I think, as a character in My Soul to Keep so appeals to me, because he can not only voice his experiences as if he just went through them yesterday, but I can insert him in places where he wasn't, in battles I think more people should know about. So the fact that he wasn't really involved in this battle, to me, is less important than the fact that in writing about him in this battle, more people will know that this battle took place and its role, in keeping Ethiopia independent for so long. So, anyway.
Now, We're short on time.
Oh, okay.
Right now. So let's, if anybody would be interested in purchasing a copy and being able to read it for yourself.
Yes, we have Devil's
We
Lake,
brought some copies
South
over
by
there.
Southeast.
And we'll be happy to continue
We
talking
have-
while we're doing that, but we're gonna have to go pick up our son
That's
after we get finished with
That
this.
sounds great.